Topic we're going to be starting with today is actually a very heavy one. So I'm not sure if I should just dive in right away, or at least, hopefully people will show up. And if people are lost, it's whatever, right? You had 5 minutes to get here. If you're still not here, you're probably not coming. So it is what it is. But yeah, I hope you guys are doing well. I hope your week was going phenomenally, and I hope you're going to enjoy the show. 6 will destroy other games on May 2026. Pringles, we're going to be talking about that as well. Yes, we'll talk about GTA 6. We'll talk about everything. But before we do any of that, there is some research that I've been sort of engrossing myself in, I guess you could say, that has been, to say the least, it's been incredibly illuminating. It's sort of, I've been on Pornhub. That's the one place I have not been. But it's been illuminating as hell. Let me just find it for you. A comment that I think put things into perspective. Now, the comment here that I'm focusing on isn't meant to attack anyone. It's not meant to drag anyone. I don't think Back to the Couch is sort of trying to cause drama or to be the topic of conversation. It's more a case of it's actually so perfect. It happened 2 hours ago, and this is something that I've been researching for about a week now. I've been looking into this, and let me just give you guys as to why I've been researching this. Have you felt in the last few years as if it's become harder and harder to actually converse with people? It's gotten to a point where you'll say something and they'll either completely miss the point, so they won't even understand what you are talking about, or they'll completely misrepresent what you're talking about. They'll repeat something back to you, and you'll be like, wait, but that's literally not what I said. That's the opposite of what I said. Or people will hold positions that you just go, wait, that's what you believe? Mason, how you doing, brother? How can that be what you're... Wait, I don't understand, right? That doesn't make sense. I mean, this happened. This comment here on one of my recent videos where I dove into a lot of research around politics and what politics does to video games. And this is sort of... I'm highlighting this comment, but there's many other comments like this. Every single time you talk about politics in video games, this happens. Where Back to the Couch says they are always political. It's just the politics that you don't like. Z Vengeance, how you doing, brother? Now, the comment, of course, here is that games or art is always political. The issue here stems from an inability to understand nuance, context, and to think critically about the claim that is being made, right? If you're focusing just on art and politics, then it's 100% true that politics and art have always sort of gone together. Most artists will use their art as a way to push activism or to stand up to some political superpower or whatever the case might be, but they definitely use it as a protest action, right? The conversation, however, as to art and politics needs to be viewed through the correct lens. It is in fact not true that politics and art as it is employed today is an age-old phenomena. Because there is a massive difference between art being political, right? In other words, it is created for the only purpose for its creation is to be political, and art masquerading as art, but in reality is political activism. Those two things are not the same. And anyone with any ability to understand context and nuance and critical reasoning skills will understand that those two things are not the same. If we go back and we look historically at video games, Is it true that video games have always involved politics? Yes, absolutely. All games everywhere have some form of politics within them. It is, however, not true that all politics in games are equal. Abakas, how you doing, brother? All politics in video games are not equal. If you go back just a decade ago, we don't even have to go back that long, but if you go back to a decade ago, what you'll find very often is that games have their own politics. Now, oftentimes, those politics can be reflective of something that happens in the real world, and the reason for it is we can't think up things that we don't know, right? The age-old sort of thing that they usually use is think of a new color, right? How can you think of a new color? You can only think of a color that you've seen before. It would be impossible to think of a new color, right? And so we do take inspiration from the real world in order to craft our worlds and our politics and all the rest of it. But in most games, just like a decade ago, what you would usually find is that if the politics is there, they really do leave it up to the player to determine how the player wants to feel about this particular political thing that they have in the game. I think back to games like Dragon Age Origins. In Dragon Age Origins, the Mage Tower and the Templars, they're very much, they're super political, right? And there's incredible politics tied into these two concepts. The big difference, however, is that the game never tells you how to think about these politics. You make your decision. You either join the Mages or you join the Templar. It completely is up to you. Whatever you want to choose, you choose. And the game doesn't criticize your choice. It merely presents the choice and you have to decide for yourself. That is how politics used to be applied to video games. In the modern era, what we see very often is modern day politics, so for example, non-binary characters, shoehorned into a medieval fantasy game where that may be okay, right? Caleb, how you doing, bro? That might be okay. Maybe there's nothing wrong with creating a non-binary character in a video game, specifically in a medieval setting. Where it becomes problematic is the player never gets given the option of how to feel about it. For the player, there is accept, or accept. In other words, we have gone from using politics as a way to flesh out and give depth to our world to politics now being the front and center cornerstone of our world. And that's something that nuance would allow for, and that you would be able to see if you thought about the problem for 2 seconds. But comments like Back to the Couch prove that that's just not the case. Most people today seem to have a complete inability to understand context, to understand nuance, to understand critical reasoning. And this led me to, ask the question, has there been a decline in critical thinking, in the ability to think critically? And the answer, and you'll see we'll go through a lot, Psychology Today calls it an emerging crisis in critical thinking. Today's college students all too often struggle with real-world problem solving. And when you actually go into the article, it shows here that young people leaving high school are actually very, very good at memorizing stuff. It's a thing called rote learning, right? Rote learning is a method of memorizing information through repetition without necessarily understanding the meaning or context of the material. And young people are phenomenal with it. You give them a piece of work, they'll remember every single word of it. The second you ask them to think critically about it, it's as if they don't understand what you're actually asking. Think critically, how so? And then I started looking even deeper into it, and I found this from the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, that this article actually pointed out so perfectly. Just listen to this. More than 6 years have passed since Richard Aram and Josipa Roxka, this is a paper that I read in the preparation for this sort of topic, rocked the academic world with their landmark book, Academically Adrift, Limited Learning on College Campuses. They have a paper as I didn't read the book, but they have a paper on this as well. Their study of more than 2,300 undergraduates at colleges and universities across the country found that many of those students improved little, if at all, in key areas, especially critical thinking. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out and why this is important, this first study, the study that this article is about, looks at high school students, so students who are now leaving high school. This study looked at students by the end of their 4 years on campus. So have they learned how to think critically, to reason critically about stuff? Since then, some scholars have disputed the book's findings, notably Roger Benjamin, president of the Council for Aid to Education, in a 2013 article entitled 3 Principal Questions About Critical Thinking Tests. But the fact remains that the end users, the organizations that eventually hire college graduates, continue to be unimpressed with their thinking ability. In 2010, the Noel Leavitt Employer Satisfaction Survey of over 900 employers identified critical thinking as the academic skill with the second largest negative gap between performance satisfaction and expectation. 4 years later, a follow-up study conducted by the Association of American Colleges and Universities found little progress, concluding that employers give students very low grades on nearly all of the 17 learning outcomes explored in the study, including critical thinking, and that students judge themselves to be far better prepared for post-college success than do employers. As recently as May of 2016, professional services firm PayScale and Future Workplace reported that 60% of employers believe new college graduates lack critical thinking skills based on their survey of over 76,000 managers and executives. You'll understand in a second why this really matters. Clearly, colleges and universities across the country aren't adequately teaching thinking skills, despite loudly insisting to anyone who will listen that they are. How do we explain the disconnect? Is it simply that colleges are lazily falling down on the job, or is it rather that they're teaching something they call critical thinking, but which really isn't? I would argue the latter. Traditionally, the critical part of the term critical thinking has referred not to the act of criticizing or finding fault, but rather to the ability to be objective. Critical in this context means open-minded, seeking out, evaluating, and weighing all the available evidence. It means being analytical, breaking an issue down into its component parts and examining each in relation to the whole. Above all, it means dispassionate, recognizing when and how emotions influence judgment, and having the mental discipline to distinguish between subjective feelings and objective reasoning, then prioritizing the latter over the former. I wrote about all of this in a recent post on the Chronicle of Higher Education's Vitae website, mostly as background for a larger point I was trying to make. I assumed that virtually all the readers would agree with the definition of critical thinking, the definition I was taught as a student in the 1980s. To my surprise, that turned out not to be the case. Several readers took me to task for being cold and emotionless, suggesting that my understanding of critical thinking, which I had always taken to be almost universal, was mistaken. I found that puzzling, until one helpful reader clued me in. I share your view. Now, listen to this. I share your view of what critical thinking should mean, he wrote. But a quite different operative definition has a stronghold in academia. In this view, the key characteristic of critical thinking in opposition to the existing system, encompassing political, economic, and social orders, deemed to privilege some and penalize others. In essence, critical thinking is equated with political, economic, and social critique. Now, you might be asking yourself, but Akelon, why is this such a big deal? Why are you focusing on this specifically when you're supposed to be making videos about video games? The consequences. The erosion of critical thinking in education has far-reaching consequences. It hampers individuals' ability to make informed decisions, navigate complex issues, and challenge prevailing narratives. It can lead to a society that is more susceptible to manipulation and misinformation. Moreover, the lack of critical thinking skills may result in a workforce that is ill-equipped to tackle the challenges of the future, such as rapid technological advancement and societal complexities. Now, the reason this is absolutely important to video gaming is that, have you guys noticed how bad the writing in video games have gotten? Have any of you noticed that? How writing has become almost trivialized and infantilized. It's as a result of this. You see, when your reader, in other words, your player, lacks the ability to understand context and nuance, because, by the way, when you lose the ability to critically think, you also lose the ability to understand nuance and context. Because nuance and context comes from the ability to think critically about a topic. So to understand the topic within the context of what is being discussed and to understand the nuance of what is being discussed. A great example of this is my debate with the YouTuber around Assassin's Creed Shadows, where we hooked onto this one key problem that they just could not see past. And that was the Yasuke being black not being the problem, but Yasuke being black in that time period. In other words, context and nuance, right? So in other words, the people aren't angry because Yasuke is black. The people are angry because they're forced to play a black character in Japan during that time period. But as you guys will note, if you go back and you listen to that interview or that debate, from this guy's perspective, he could not understand this. From his perspective, there was no way that people just didn't want to play with a black character. No matter how many times I tried to explain to him the context and the nuance of the take, from his perspective, just racist, right? So this is important because from a writer's perspective, if you want to write a piece of work that requires your audience to employ critical thinking, to understand context and nuance, you're going to have a hell of a time in the modern era. How the hell are you supposed to write a script like, the old days, Dragon Age Origin? We can go back to Diablo 1, Diablo 2 even. You can go back to the early days of World of Warcraft. Writing like that would be completely lost on the modern audience, because the modern audience, and when I say the modern audience, I'm genuinely not talking about the majority. It's actually not the majority, not even close. But young people specifically, and I think some older people as well, they just don't have the ability to comprehend it. I remember back in high school, we used to have comprehension tests, where the entire test would be sort of like an excerpt that you're given. You have to read the excerpt, and then you have to write down answer a series of questions that is meant to test your comprehension ability, so that you can understand what you just read. And the teacher wants to know whether or not you can think about what it is you just read. Stuff like that has gone the way of the dodo bird, because we're prioritizing rote learning. Instead, we want to make sure that people just they can just regurgitate what is being said and how it's being said. And this all loops back to this comment. This one comment that I see everywhere, especially on the left, although people on the right aren't completely immune to it, but this comment is everywhere. And it's I hate saying this, but it has sort of made me reevaluate my stance on a number of things. I used to believe, and I genuinely got into this fight thinking that there's a way to change people's minds. There's a way to change the industry in some way, shape, or form. I now no longer hold that view. I don't know if there is a way to change the industry. I don't know if there is a way to fix people's minds. Because if you have no ability to comprehend anything, you and I won't be able to have any conversation of value, because whatever I say will be interpreted by you as completely wrong. And the reason for it is, in the modern world, the way young people are taught to critically think is that thinking is subjective. Anything you say is not important, because there's no real truth in what you say. The truth is in how I perceive what you say. right? So my feeling is what is true, not what you said. The words you used is of no importance. It's how I feel when I hear what you said. That's the truth of the matter, right? So we're in this sort of post-truth, post-modern hellscape. Now, I ask you, maybe some of you have an idea of how you can do this. How do you communicate with someone where what you say is of no import, what they think you said is of greater import? How do you? I don't know.